Hi people, it's me Anja, my pronouns all she and her, and welcome back to my channel for a new video. I mentioned this in one of my last videos, I think, but I recently watched Wicked for Good on opening night, so I decided to read the Wicked original book, especially since part 1 was so good and so awesome, and one of my favorite elements of part 1 is like the theme of propaganda and how fast it can really spread. And so when I was researching this original book, I learned that it was inspired by how like evil can start and how other people perceive that, if that makes any sense, because one of the reasons as to why propaganda can spread very quickly is because it like exasperates people's xenophobic tendencies that already exist, if that makes any sense. And I think that like in part 1, how people are so quickly to believe that Elphaba is evil, even though you know that she isn't, is because people were already initially racist towards her, if that makes any sense. Anyway, also when I'm reading this book, I am going to imagine like the characters as the cast of Wicked, even though I know or I've heard that I think Cynthia is one of the first Black actresses to portray Elphaba, and previously Elphaba has not been played by a person of color, similarly to how Nessa Rose has not been played by an actor who's actually a wheelchair user in real life until now. And I also really hope that in future movies and stuff that Melissa Baudet really opens more avenues for disabled actors. I think that she is such a good actor, and honestly, especially in part 2, because like another thing that I really loved from part 1 is that Nessa Rose's character and how she's perceived as a disabled person was incredibly relatable to me as a disabled person. But then obviously in part 2, not to spoil anything, but her character really takes like a different direction than I would have done in that situation, obviously. But anyway, all that to say, Elphaba is definitely my favorite character from the movies. So anyway, with that said, I'm very excited to start this book and really truly like analyze it. So let's get started. So first of all, it's been a few hours since I've talked to you because when I was reading the book for the first time, I realized that I was starting to fall asleep, not because of the content of the book necessarily, but because I was just so fatigued. So I took a nap. And now here I am, refreshed and ready to go. And my first impression of this book is that the politics between like the different groups of people in Oz regarding the different parts of the country as a whole are kind of confusing. And I don't really understand like the whole religious, superstitious, magical element to it all. But basically, I do know that I'm very much in the beginning. Nessa Rose, I believe, is about to be born, which means, according to the Wicked Part 1 movie, Elphaba's mom is about to die. So, that's interesting. So, yeah, there's that. And in Wicked Part 2, they reveal that the Wizard of Oz is Elphaba's father? So am I supposed to believe that the turtle guy, who also talks about himself in the third person, is her dad? I don't know. Since I just saw the movie, I can't quite separate my thoughts and knowledge of Wicked Part 2 from the book. So maybe I should have waited to read this book until, like, my memories of the movie faded, but I didn't. So here I am. Anyway, also the prologue started with Elphaba observing the crew of the Wizard of Oz. And they were, like, gossiping about her, basically. And also, I wanted to say that I've seen... Have I? No, never mind. I've read the original Wizard of Oz book when I was a child, but I don't think I've ever seen the original Wizard of Oz movie, like from the 40s or whatever. I don't think I've actually seen it. And then I watched Wicked, the Broadway play, when I was 11 in West End, and it was so good and so awesome. So when I watched Wicked Part 1 last year, since it had been so long, all I remembered was Defying Gravity and Popular, so I didn't quite remember the plot or anything else. So anyway, with that said, that's the knowledge I have going into this book. So I was wrong, and now we're in Glinda's perspective, and she is going to shiz, and Elphaba's about to become her roommate. And I've always analyzed Glinda's character from the movies so far as someone who's very privileged and is used to being very privileged. So when things don't happen to her in the way that she expects them to, she gets upset. You know what I mean? I feel like this is extremely prevalent in the first movie, particularly in this scene where her friends literally pick her up and then take her away. I think you know what I'm talking about in the first movie if you've seen it. Second of all, I've always portrayed, or what's the word? As for her arc in the second movie, I liked it and I understood it, but I wasn't more sympathetic towards her than I was already. And I kind of felt like little Glinda was unnecessary in the second movie, although obviously the child actor was very cute and very awesome, and I love to see the photos of her and young Elphaba and young Nessa Rose and the three of them hanging out are literally so cute. But I thought that her character was unnecessary and it didn't do anything for me, frankly. So anyway, like I said earlier, whenever I'm reading this book, I am imagining these characters as the actors who are portraying them in the movie. So as I read about Glinda, for example, I am imagining Ariana Grande. I don't know if I should be doing that, but I am, because that's the only reference I have. So apparently, Bach knew Elphaba when she was a child? What? And also, it seems to me that Elphaba's nickname of Elfie came from Bach originally, but in the musical, it's implied that Glinda came up with it to further emphasize their relationship. And I don't think I said this earlier, but this video will contain spoilers for the book as well as for both movies. So yeah, and I will be talking about how I think of the characters as they are introduced in this book versus the movies. So my first impression of Bach, or SpongeBob, Ethan Slater, is that he seems nice. I don't know. When I watched Wicked Part 2, when he became, does he become the Tin Man or the Scarecrow? He becomes the Tin Man. I don't really care, because the romance in the Wicked movies, I forgot when I was watching Part 2 that that is an element of the story that I was supposed to be paying attention to. So the romance between Bach and Nessa Rose, I wasn't really paying attention to it because obviously it's not mutual, so I don't care. So, yeah. So the context here is that Elphaba is working with Dr. Dillerman, the goat professor, over the summer, and he's trying to prove there's no inherent difference between humans and animals, which is true, and Elphaba's of the mind that if you can find proof of that, then people will choose to do right, which is a very hopeful perspective, absolutely. But I know from watching the musical, at least part 1, that that's not always the case, because here's the thing. You can introduce people to the proof of whatever you're trying to convince them. You can show them a billion reasons to do the right thing, to stand on the right side of history. You can show them like mounds and mounds of evidence, but so many people will still choose to be selfish and do the wrong thing because it inconveniences them to do the right thing. Does that make any sense? Because some people truly like don't care at their core and are so selfish and privileged and have so much power and money that they don't care. And I'm curious as to when Elphaba's like hopeful perspective changes, because one of the things that I really disliked about Wicked Part 2 is that essentially she gives up because she never quite exposes the wizard. And maybe that happened in The Wizard of Oz. Again, I haven't seen the original Judy Garland movie, so I don't really remember or know the plot. Nor do I really remember the book, because again, I read the book as a child. But like, it really frustrated me that after No Good Deed, Elphaba embraces her like evil image and gives up and never exposes the wizard and his like the fact that he's a fraud. That pissed me off. Anyway, that's where I'm at right now. Dr. Dillman dies. What? I'm barely a fourth through this book. He's dead? That's not in the movie, obviously. What? Anyway. So now that Fiello and Nessa Rose have been incorporated into Shiz, I wanted to quickly go over some differences between the book and the musical. First of all, Nessa Rose has no arms in the book, which is how she's disabled, whereas in the musical, she's in a wheelchair. And in the book, she has less balance, obviously, because she doesn't have arms. So she struggles with walking and has less balance, but she does not use a wheelchair, if I'm understanding this correctly. Second of all, Fiello is implied to be a person of color, which further implies that he's whitewashed in the musical, which is an interesting factor. And again, I've only seen one edition of the play in West End, so I wonder if he's ever been played by an actor of color in the play. I don't know. Anyway, that's where I'm at right now. Fiello is not yet friends with the rest of the people. Another thing is that in the book, Elphaba and Nessa Rose are 3 years apart in age and also in terms of school years, but in the musical, it's more implied that they're in the same year in school. So that's fun. So I'm now 34% of this book, and so much has happened. First of all, we're now in Fiello's perspective. We were in Bach's perspective, and before that, we were in Glinda's, and then before that, we were in Elphaba's, and now we're in Fiello's perspective, and he has randomly met up with Elphaba, who apparently dropped out of Shiz after she and Glinda met the wizard, and she was, for lack of a better word, disappointed by him. So that happened. It's been 5 years since Fiello has seen Elphaba, and I think Fiello is the year below Elphaba and Glinda in school, because he says that Glinda graduated before him. And then it explains that after Elphaba dropped out of Shiz, Nessa Rose grew very, lonely and turned to religion for comfort, I guess, even though the two of them were not really close as sisters to begin with. So, yeah, that's where we're at currently. So, Elphaba attempted to assassinate Madame Mobile, and Fiello was caught instead of her, so he was captured by the police essentially, and now she is hiding with some nuns because she feels guilty that he was caught, but he was caught because he was following her the entire time. And also, they've been having an affair, and I say an affair because he has a wife and 3 kids. Why are they all in their early 20s and already married? Let's talk about that. Speaking of, Bach married one of Glinda's friends, because in the book, Glinda has 3 friends, and the musical she only has 2. So, anyway, Bach's wife also, tries to commit suicide all the time, apparently, and they just joke about it? What? That's so insensitive. I barely know anything about this woman, but that's so insensitive and weird. So I hope she's okay. I hope that there's a hospital or something for her in this world. And also, speaking of the world building, which I haven't really discussed yet, I'm enjoying it so far. It's quite descriptive. It seems as if the setting is inspired by the 1800s or something, since the girls can't hang out with other men without a chaperone and stuff like that. And also, speaking of men, Elphaba and Nestleros have a brother. His name is Shell. He's 15 as of now. Also, another difference is that Glinda is magical. Now, I understand that, if you watched Wicked Part 2, it's revealed that Glinda becomes magical after choosing to be good. But in this book, Glinda is already drawn to the magic already by the beginning. Although now she's graduated from Shiz. So, yeah. Also, there's all these big time jumps that are clearly not in the musical. So, except for obviously between part 1 and 2. But I don't know how much time Elphaba has spent so far with the nuns, but when she first met up with Philo and they first started having an affair, like I said, it had been 5 years since they had seen each other. So, that's interesting. As for their affair, I mean, I don't really like it. I don't really like it when people cheat on their partners. I think that's really unfair and disrespectful. So, anyway, there's that. I'm almost halfway through this book, and Elphaba has now moved in with Fielo's wife. Also, Fielo's dead. What the fuck is happening in this book? I can tell why the writer of the screenplay wanted to immediately condense this book, because there's so much happening, and frankly, so much of it feels unnecessary. So I'm just confused. Also, the fact that Elphaba is only a witch because, so after she left the nuns, she met up with that Princess Elephant person who made her a witch, or that she could appear as a witch to hide her identity or something. I don't know what any of that was for. And it's been years since she's seen Glinda or Bach or Nestlerose or anyone. And my gosh, can we get back to Elphaba's perspective already? Because now we're in Samila's perspective. Samila, who is Fio's wife, and she has all these children and stuff. Oh my gosh. There's so much to read. My gosh. I'm going to be here all day. I think I probably mispronounced Fielo's wife's name earlier. I think it's pronounced Solima. Solima? I'm not quite sure. And she's part of some sort of like tribe. And I know the language in this book is not up to date necessarily to PC 2025 standards. And I'm wondering if she is supposed to be indigenous coded. You know what I mean? Because if yellow is implied to be a person of color, it's perfectly understandable to think that she's also a person of color since they were engaged as children because he's royalty and everything. You know what I mean? Anyway, I don't know if I'm cooking or if the stove is off, but let me know. Did I read this correctly? Elphaba's father and Nessarosa's father and their mother were all in a polyamorous relationship? What the fuck? What? That's so weird. Like, I'm all for polyamory, but I feel like that's so odd. You know what I mean? Anyway, I'm a single virgin. I have no legs to stand on, so maybe I should just shut up. But what? Let me know if you also find that to be odd. I need to know. I am almost 70% through this book. Oh my goodness. A few things that have happened since is that Elphaba killed Madame Morrible because 15 years ago she suspects that Madame Morrible had Dr. Dillman killed, which is probably true. And I feel like there's a rumor going on that Madame Morrible and the Wizard of Oz are in cahoots, whereas in the musical movie, it's more explicit. Second of all, there was so much telling and not enough showing. And there was so much happening over the course of literally so much time that, like, I'm getting bogged down by all of this information. And the way that Elphaba is still having discussions about how evil originates is getting kind of boring because she has not come to a conclusion yet. It's been 15 years. Either come to a conclusion or move on. Like, I don't get it. Anyway, so there's that. So I finished the book. And frankly, Elphaba, to me, is so annoying. And it's interesting to me that the musical is written as if Elphaba and Glinda's relationship is central to the story, whereas in this book, it isn't at all. Elphaba doesn't really have a lot of friends, like close relationships, platonically, after she drops out of Shiz, not including her affair with Fiello. My favorite character from the book, I guess, is Bach. He seems to be the most sensible, particularly this quote from him, and also in the book, he has a wife and children too. Also, upon clarification, I've discovered that Elphaba didn't kill Madame Morrible, but she wanted to, but Madame Morrible died moments before she got there or something. But, like, she, like, beat up her dead body out of revenge or something. I don't know, dude. And also, at the end, Dorothy wanted to save Elphaba because her broom caught on fire, but unfortunately Dorothy accidentally killed her because she's allergic to water. So, yeah. I think this book is kind of confusing because, again, there's so much information happening at once. Another change from the book to the musical play movie is that, what was it? I completely forgot. Oh, Elphaba's father dies in the musical before Nessa Rose dies. But in this book, when Nessa Rose dies, her dad is still alive. So that's an interesting, like, change, I guess. I don't know. I felt like Glinda was underdeveloped. Nessa Rose is underdeveloped. Philo, I do not care about. Because also his wife has more screen time than him. So, anyway, I rated the book 3 stars. So, that's exciting. This book is vastly different from the musical, and it's so obvious that I think their names are Stephen and Winnie, who wrote the screenplay of the musical, just took the characters' names from the original book that Gregory wrote and then, like, adapted it, or they took more inspiration from the original book of The Wizard of Oz than this one, if that makes any sense. I think Gregory has written more books in this universe. I think technically this book is the start of maybe a trilogy or something, but I don't really care because Elphaba's dead now, so like, what will the sequel even follow? Nessa Rose is dead, Fiona is dead. Would it follow Glinda? I don't know. The musical movie develops Glinda and Elphaba and Nessa Rose and Philo and kind of Bach too, I guess, more than this book ever does. So that's fun. I think I was expecting this book to be more analytical than it was. I don't know why I was expecting it to be like a babble rather than like a less intellectual book. And I also I think the most surprising change from the book to the musical is that Dr. Dillman died so early in the book. What? Because in the musical, if you remember, like, he just gets fired. He doesn't die. So yeah, anyway, there's that. So in conclusion, another thing that I completely forgot to mention is the wizard. So in the book, Elphaba discovers that the wizard is her father, whereas in the movie, Elphaba never discovers that, but Glinda does. And also, like, the wizard is absolutely despicable in the book, because why does he kill Fiolo's family? But then he keeps one of Fiolo's daughters as a slave. So, what the fuck is wrong with you? Many things are wrong with you. And he's from a different world. He's not from Oz. He's from whatever the Grimly is from. I don't know, dude. That part's kind of confusing. Many elements of this book were confusing, let's be frank. But anyway, yeah. I rated this book 3 stars. I feel like my thoughts were completely all over the place. Yeah. As the title suggests, I read this book so that you didn't have to. I think the musical is better and more focused and driven, and everything felt necessary. Although in general, I preferred part 1 to part 2 of Wicked the movies, just because in part 2, I felt like the plot was a roller coaster. So much happened in such a little time. And even though I cried multiple times at the end during For Good, like, the soundtrack is better in the first movie than the second movie. I think that For Good is very sad in the context of the movie, so watching it is sad visually, but like I wouldn't listen to any of those songs outside of the musical, whereas I have Defying Gravity on repeat, if that makes any sense. And obviously the acting of Melissa and Cynthia and Aliana and everyone is so fantastic and so good. I also love the singing and the songs and the choreography and the costumes and literally everything. And also in the musical in part 2, I really appreciated as a disabled person that they changed they changed Nessa Rose's ending, that she's floating instead of walking, since Melissa Baudet cannot walk in real life. And also the idea of like curing a disability, in my opinion, is frankly ableist. So yeah. Anyway, all that to say, if you enjoy this video, please don't hesitate to give it a big thumbs up. Comment down below the magic emoji. Is there like a magician witch emoji? I don't remember. But if there is, comment it down below. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to my channel if you're new. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye.